We're going to be reading this morning from Proverbs chapter 9. And we're going to be looking at the entire chapter, Proverbs chapter 9, looking at verses 1 through 18. And I'm going to be reading from the NIV, and all of the verses that we'll be looking at this morning will be coming from the NIV. Wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, "Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense," she says, "Come, eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. So, something that my family and I have been fortunate enough to enjoy in the past has been visiting Disney World. So, we're big Disney fans, but if you've ever been to Florida, especially Florida in the summertime, something that you might know about that particular state in the summer is it's pretty hot and it's pretty gross. It's humid, and if you can imagine, being outside in an amusement park all day in the Florida summer, you look for opportunities to get breaks. Specifically, you look for opportunities to get breaks that are inside, in places where you can get air conditioning, and even better, if you could find opportunities to get inside in air conditioning where you can sit down for an extended period of time. And one of my favorite places to do this in Disney World is a ride, and it's at Epcot, and it's a ride called Spaceship Earth. And I don't know if you've ever been to Epcot, but Spaceship Earth is the ride that if you've been at Epcot or you've seen pictures of Epcot, it's the ride that's inside the giant golf ball thing that is like in the center of Epcot. And it's a glorious place to get a nice 25-minute break in the air conditioning. You sit down, it's a slow, dark ride. It might even lull you to sleep a little bit as you're kind of just moving through. So you sit in this little car, and it takes you on this progression through these different scenes. And the scenes are showing you the progression of the different methods and mediums that human beings have used for the recording and transmission of knowledge and information, going all the way back to the beginnings of human of recorded history. So it starts by taking you through a scene where there's cave paintings, and where people have illustrated things like how to hunt together in a team and what plants are safe to eat and things like that. But the problem with cave paintings was that when you had to move on from a cave, if your people or your family had to move on, you left all of your recorded knowledge behind, and you couldn't bring any of that with you. So from that scene, you move on to another scene, and there's this animatronic person who's pounding out reeds, and he's pounding out the reeds to make papyrus. And that's sort of this next big advancement in the recording of knowledge, is that now knowledge can be recorded in a way that is portable. Like, we can record knowledge in a way that we don't have to leave it behind on the cave walls. We can take it with us. And then we continue to move on in the scene. And now we move on to the scene where there's these scrolls, scroll upon scroll, filling these libraries. And you continue to move through each sort of stage of the process of humanity recording and spreading information. And we come to the printing press. And now we've got bound books, and information is continuing to spread more rapidly. And then you keep going, and you come to the telegraph, and you come to radio communication, and you come to television. And then eventually you get to the point where you've got digital communication, and we've got the internet. And these advancements just continue. And as these advancements keep going, our ability to record and transmit knowledge, they spur on all these other countless developments in our society. But as I thought about these advancements, and as I go through this ride and our ability to record and spread information, there's another reality that stands out to me as I go through this. And it's this. It's as the process of recording and spreading information over the history of humanity got easier and easier and easier, the level of scrutiny we apply to information that we record and spread gets less and less and less in terms of how important is this information, how useful is this information, and how true is this information. I mean, think about it. If you're going to put something on the cave wall, you better be pretty sure that it's true. They're pretty sure this is the best way to hunt a woolly mammoth. Otherwise, you're in a lot of trouble. You're wasting some prime real estate there. And think about this, though. Now, I could literally take out my phone. I could type anything. I could record myself saying anything. I could take a picture of anything and share it on any one of dozens of social media platforms that exist. And maybe hundreds, if not thousands of people might potentially see it or read it. And to show you what I mean, so several years ago, I put together a stupid video. I took clips from an old Comcast internet commercial to use as a sermon illustration with these turtles called the Slow Skis. Anybody remember the old Comcast internet commercials with the Slow Skis in them? So I took the clips of these turtles, put them together in a video, put it on YouTube just so I could take it from YouTube and embed it into a PowerPoint. So put it on YouTube, and this was just going to show you the video real quick, just so you can get an idea of how dumb this video is. Here it is.
Hello? Test 1, 2. What would my t-shirt say?
Well, I think it would say.
I don't have things that say t-shirts that say things.
But honey, if we were to make you a shirt that said something on it,
a fictitious
the obvious choice
shirt, like
is
a made-up shirt.
We like it.
We like it.
We like it slow.
We like it slow.
We like
right.
it slow.
We like it slow.
He would have gotten there.
Right.
but-
We like it slow. The other day, there was a knock on the door for about an hour because they could see that we were inside, but not quite getting to the door. And we were like, you just hold it. We'll get to the door when it needs to be open. Just because a knock comes doesn't mean the door should be open immediately. Let's appreciate the knock and the sound of bone on wood.
I could raft for hours.
I inflated the raft.
Yeah,
Took me a week.
Yeah. Bill inflates that raft and I'm gone. Take it nice and slow.
Not lazy. Methodical. Calculated. Like a solar power calculator on a cloudy day.
Mm-hmm.
So I put that video together, put it out on YouTube so I could embed it in my PowerPoint. Since that time, that video has been viewed 75,000 times on YouTube. So, not a lot of scrutiny being applied to what people are viewing in terms of the level of importance for what people are looking at online and what is being spread online. We are swimming in information that is freely shared and rarely vetted all that well. And it's this reality that we're living in today that's going to be the issue at hand as we dive now into the third week of our summer series in Proverbs that we're calling The Way of Wisdom, where we're working our way through the book of Proverbs in order to learn how to walk in the way of wisdom that's ultimately embodied in the life of Jesus. So in week 1 of our series, Dave started us off talking about where does this way of wisdom begin? What is the starting point? And talking about how the starting point is the fear of the Lord, this understanding of this reverence and awe of who God is. And last week, Gene shared with us how wisdom understands the end of our choices and warns us and sees the end result, while sin and folly doesn't care about the end result of our choices. And this week, we're going to be asking ourselves the question of how do we discern? How do we know the difference between the path of wisdom and the path of folly or the path of sin? And we read Proverbs 9 this morning, but we're also going to be going back a little bit to Proverbs 7 and 8 as well. And my hope is that as we do this, that there's going to be a big idea that'll jump out at us, which is this, that wisdom is less of a collection of concepts to understand than it is a person to be known. Because Proverbs 7 through 9 presents wisdom to us and folly as voices calling out to us. And they call out to us in very different ways. And they call out to us with different goals, and they call out to us with different levels of clarity, and they also call out to us with very differing levels of concern for our well-being. And they have different voices. And it's only in knowing the voice of wisdom that we can discern wisdom's call from folly's call. So as we look at Proverbs 7 through 9 and see both wisdom and folly calling, we see many of these differences highlighted. And I think when we find ourselves feeling a call or feeling a pull in our lives to make a certain decision or do something, there are some questions that we can be asking ourselves based on these chapters to help us know which of these voices is actually speaking to us. And this is, we're not going to be able to hit an exhaustive list this morning. We're going to focus on 3 questions that I think we can pull from this chapter. And the first question I want us to focus on is this: is the call public or is the call secret? In Proverbs 8, we read first about how wisdom calls to us. In verse 1 of Proverbs 8, does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? Contrast that to the approach of folly in Proverbs chapter 7, looking at verses 9 and verse 12, at twilight. As the day was fading, as the dark of night set in, then out came a woman to meet him. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. Wisdom is calling out. Wisdom is raising her voice. Wisdom is publicly shouting, while folly is lurking in the shadows. Practically speaking, what does this question look like in our lives? Do I feel the need to hide the choices that I'm making? A wise choice doesn't tend to come with shame attached to it or fear of others knowing about a choice that I've made or this thing that I'm doing. Because here's the thing, godly wisdom is not afraid of the light. Like a healthy plant, it grows stronger in the open air under the sun of accountability. But sin and foolishness, they're like mushrooms. They thrive in the dark. So if you feel compelled to say things like, don't ask me about that, or you wouldn't understand, or it might be worth asking, is this truly like a matter of discretion? Or am I really trying to cover for something that's unwise? Wisdom walks openly, while folly tells us to pull the shades. When you're in the midst of a wise choice, you can give very clear and unambiguous answers to questions like, what are you doing? Or why are you doing that? Or what are you looking at? Or who was that on the phone? Or who was that text from? Or where were you? Or where are you going? Or what did you buy? Furthermore, wisdom is okay with people in our lives asking those questions to us. It's not offended by those questions. Whether those people are our spouses, whether those people are our parents, whether those people are our close friends, people in our lives that are committed to our well-being. Because folly wants to hide. Foolish choices, though, thrive in isolation. So foolish choices are always going to call to us secretly and encourage us to keep it secret and be cryptic and be evasive. Perhaps even sometimes in the name of something noble, like asking people, if you could just respect my privacy, or why don't you trust me, or stop being so judgmental. But in reality, oftentimes those things can just be an effort to keep our foolish choices in the dark where they can thrive. Wisdom calls to us publicly, and folly calls to us in secret. Second question is, does the call encourage growth or indulgence? Have a look at these two calls. First, folly in Proverbs chapter 9, looking at verses 16 and 17. Lady Wisdom says, "Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense," she says, this is Lady Folly. "To those who have no sense," she says, "stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious." Then verses 4 through 6, Lady Wisdom says, "Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense," she says, "come eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and you will live. Walk in the way of insight." Two very similar calls to the same people, but with very different goals. Folly is saying, come, enjoy this stolen water, this secret food. Let's indulge. Let's just enjoy the pleasure of the moment. But wisdom says, eat my food, drink my wine, and leave your simple ways. Live, walk in the way of insight. Wisdom calls us to more than just the pleasure of the moment, while folly always speaks this language of urgency. You deserve this. You need this now. Don't overthink it. Don't think about it too much. And there's always the thrill in that kind of invitation. It scratches the itch for control and comfort and escape. But wisdom says, don't just feel better now for a moment. Become better for a lifetime. One way leads to temporary relief. The other is lasting joy. So when you find yourself pulled in a direction that feels exciting but avoids discomfort, that's a good time to pause and ask, is this making me more like Jesus? Or is this just numbing me to something that really I just don't want to face? You know, I really appreciated what Gene shared with us last week, and he said something that some may have found pretty surprising. He said that God's ultimate goal for our lives is not our happiness. He said that God is much more concerned with our growth and our maturity and our holiness than our happiness. But you know what I think is somewhat ironic about that reality is that there is one relatively surefire way to guarantee that you will live a pretty unhappy life. And that is this: make your own personal happiness your ultimate goal. The ultimate irony, I feel like, in life is that when our personal happiness is our ultimate goal, it generally leads to the exact opposite. So while God does not necessarily make our happiness his primary goal, real happiness and real joy does, more often than not, tend to accompany the growth and the meaning and the connection that comes from choosing to follow him. And I've always loved the way that Tim Keller put this and has described this, and I've used this quote time and time again, where he says this, he says, happiness is a byproduct of wanting something more than happiness, to be rightly related to God and our neighbor. Truly happy people understand that there are things that are more important than happiness. And those people are choosing the way of wisdom. Because when we make happiness our ultimate goal, we always attach happiness to something or some goal. Then we achieve that goal, and we're happy for a little bit, but then we want something else. And then we're unhappy until we have that next thing. And then maybe we get that, and then we're unhappy again until the next thing. So it ultimately leads to this deep sense of dissatisfaction unless we want something more than happiness. And then happiness comes along with that. Last question in discerning the voice of wisdom, is the call truthful or manipulative? Have a look at these calls. First, verses 6 through 9 of chapter 8. My mouth speaks what is true, wisdom says. For my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They are upright to those who have found knowledge. But folly, in chapter 7, so I came out to meet you. I have looked for you and have found you. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. Folly comes out and says, it's you, just the person I've been looking for. She strokes his ego and tells him what he wants to hear. But wisdom speaks what is true and what is plain. Nothing crooked, nothing that's meant to deceive, nothing that's meant to manipulate. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, though, wisdom doesn't always feel all that good at first. It doesn't flatter our ego. It doesn't tell us what we want to hear, but it always tells us what we need to hear. And that's one of the ways that we can start to recognize it. Wisdom leaves us grounded, not inflated. If the voice you're listening to is building your sense of entitlement, and you find yourself always feeling in every situation either like, I'm always the victim in every story, or I'm always the hero in every story, it might not be wisdom that you're listening to. The voice of wisdom may humble you, but it will never lie to you. And that's how it makes you holy. In these first chapters of Proverbs, chapters 1 through 9, we have Solomon here passing wisdom on to his son. And he's asking him and he's pleading with him, follow the voice of wisdom, flee the voice of folly. You know, and what's interesting is that the moment his son, Rehoboam, he takes the throne after Solomon's death, and he's faced with a very clear choice of which of these voices to follow. In 1 Kings 12, we find Rehoboam being crowned king. The assembly of Israel approaches him with a request. And they say, your father has placed a heavy load on us. And he did. Solomon placed a heavy load on the people. They had a lot of forced labor, high taxes, long stretches of service to keep up with some pretty big building projects like the temple and his palace. And they asked Rehoboam, can you lighten our load? Lighten the load and we will serve you. That's what they say to Rehoboam. So, Rehoboam seeks counsel. Okay, not a bad first choice. So first he goes to the elders who served his father Solomon. So Solomon, the author of these Proverbs, pretty smart guy, one of the wisest people to ever live. He goes to the elders who advises his father, the one who's pleading with him to follow wisdom, and the counselors to his father tell him, they say, yes, grant this request. If you grant this request now, these people will be loyal to you forever. Well, this answer doesn't sit all that well with Rehoboam, so he dismisses his father's counselors and he goes to his friends, the guys he hangs out with. And he's like, what do you guys think? And these guys, they stroke his ego. Like, who do these people think they are? You're the king. Who are these people to make demands of you? So have a look at their response, their guidance to the king. Here's what you tell them. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. It's another way to go. So, people are like, all right, see ya. The kingdom of Israel splits, and all but Judah abandons Rehoboam, and it's the beginning of the divided kingdom area of Israel. Wisdom does not just affirm what we want to hear. Wisdom challenges us when we need to be challenged. Wisdom humbles us when we need to be humbled. One of the biggest problems in our world today is that we surround ourselves with people who only think exactly like us. And then our social media feeds us a never-ending stream of content that just affirms our beliefs and perspectives, and we have forgotten how to let ourselves be questioned and challenged and corrected and ultimately discipled. And we end up strolling happily down the way of folly. So I want to pause here for a moment and give us a chance to reflect. In verses 7 through 12 of Proverbs 9, we're given kind of some signs that can help us know whether we're actually currently walking in the way of wisdom when he talks about these two kind of issues of correction and teaching. But it's not just about how we respond to correction. It's also about, are we pursuing the kinds of relationships that help us grow in the first place? So let me offer just some reflection questions for us to consider. When somebody comes to you with a concern about a decision or a behavior or something in your life, what's our response to that? Do we listen? Do we consider? Or do we just sort of immediately get defensive and shut that down or explain it away? Do we find ourselves naturally drawn to people who affirm everything that we do? Or do we seek people out who can challenge us and stretch us and teach us, people who want more for us than just our comfort? Are we building the kinds of relationships that lead to growth, or the kind that let us just stay exactly where we are? Because here's a hard truth. If no one in our life is helping us grow, we may have stopped growing. And if we're only listening to voices that make us feel good about ourselves and good about every choice that we're making, it might be worth asking whether we've already stopped listening to wisdom. Because wisdom doesn't just accept growth, it looks for it. It pursues it. It pursues the kind of relationships that push us toward Jesus. Folly avoids those relationships every time. So take a second and ask yourself, honestly, which voice have you been following? And what kinds of voices are you inviting in? But as helpful as these questions are, not enough. If we stop in situations and we ask ourselves these questions when we're faced with decisions, sure, we will probably make better decisions by and large, but we'll still be missing something that's pretty important. Because remember, our big idea was that wisdom is less about a collection of concepts to understand than it is a person to be known. And as I was thinking through this message over the last couple of weeks, an experience from my younger years that was a pretty regular part of my life came to mind. So picture it with me. The year is sometime pre-1997, and I'm at home, and I want to communicate with a friend of mine who is in his home somewhere else. So what I have to do is I have to pick up the phone that is attached to the wall of my house by a wire. And this is what it looks like. For those of you who have maybe younger who have never seen the wall phone, this is what it was. So I pick up that phone, and then I actually have to dial my friend's number, which I have memorized. Yeah, crazy. And then the phone on the wall of their house is going to ring, and then some random member of their household is going to pick up the phone. Then I have to go through this process of saying hello, telling them who I am, and then asking them if my friend is home. And then I have to wait for them to go find my friend in some other room of their house, so you're just kind of waiting. And then they bring my friend to the phone, and then we get to talk. Or they tell me that no, that my friend's not there. And then I'm like, all right, then I got to tell them a message to give to my friend and ask them to call me back. An exhausting process, all right? But occasionally, something wonderful would happen. You'd pick up the phone and call, and the other on the line would pick up, and you'd hear your friend's voice, and you'd recognize it, and you breathe a sigh of relief. No formalities are necessary, and you know it's them, and you just say, hey, and they say, hey, and they know it's you, and all is right with the world. You recognize each other. Because you know, not because you know like the types of things that they would or would not say. I mean, maybe, but you know it because you know their voice. Proverbs 7-9 paints a vivid picture of two voices, wisdom and folly, each calling out to each other, each inviting us into a way of life. And while Lady Wisdom in Proverbs is a poetic personification, she ultimately points forward to something far greater. In the New Testament, we come face to face with the fulfillment of that vision in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus doesn't just speak wisdom, he is wisdom. He is the very embodiment of God's character, truth, and purpose. Lady Wisdom prepares a house and feast. Jesus says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you." Wisdom sends out an open invitation. Jesus cried out, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened." Wisdom calls us to life. Jesus said, "I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." Jesus is the voice of wisdom made flesh. And the more we know him, the more instinctively we begin to recognize his voice. And that's what Jesus meant when he said in John 10, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." But here's the thing. You don't recognize a voice by accident. You recognize it by repeated exposure to that voice, by familiarity, by relationship. The voice of Jesus becomes recognizable when we spend time with him. So if we want to walk in wisdom, not just reacting to life, but discerning the path of life, we need to make a habit of tuning our ear to Jesus, a habit that begins through regular, ordinary, faithful practices, spiritual habits, reading scripture, specifically reading the Gospels to get to know and understand Jesus, how he speaks, what are his priorities. Unhurried prayer, not just requests, but space to listen and reflect and confess and be honest and become more familiar with his Spirit's voice. Worship, yes, in music, but in community and in solitude. Worship is one of the ways that we retune our hearts to what's most real and true. Obedience. Sometimes the most powerful way to hear Jesus more clearly is to simply make sure we are doing and obeying the things that we already know that Jesus has said. Wise Christian community, people around us that know Jesus well and help us recognize when whether or not what we're hearing is the voice of Jesus or not. And none of it or new or some like new strategy or anything like that, but over time they train our heart to recognize the voice of our shepherd. Because wisdom is not just a list of concepts to master. It's a person to know. And the more intimately we know Jesus, the more instinctively we recognize when it's his voice calling and when it's not. And that's what the Apostle Paul was pointing to when he wrote in 1 Corinthians, "Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. So when Paul writes that Christ has become for us wisdom from God, that is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption, he's not just using poetic language. He's pointing to a core truth that we've been exploring all morning. The wisdom of Proverbs calls us to pursue is not ultimately found in clever sayings or moral insights. It's found in a person. And the world lifts up the powerful and the polished and the elite, but God shows what is weak and what is lowly and what seems foolish in the world's eyes to reveal something far deeper: his grace, his purposes, and his Son. And that means that the wisdom is not beyond our reach. And we don't need to be perfect. We don't need a perfect record. We don't need to have all the answers. We just need to come to Jesus and follow Jesus and trust him and walk with him and learn to recognize his voice and follow where it leads. Because in the end, wisdom is the call of Christ. And if we want to be wise, we don't just need to think better. We need to follow Jesus more closely. So today, choose the way of wisdom, not by trying harder, but by knowing him more. Walk with him. Listen to him. Trust him, because he's not only our Savior, he's your wisdom. And when we hear his voice, we'll know it. Because the more we know him, the more clearly we'll recognize it's him who's calling and when it's not. Let's pray.